Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we've got another bag making video tutorial for you. We're going to be making the Trendsetter Zip Top Tote by So Many Creations. This is a really fun bag to make. It's a good size. It's not too large, but you can definitely get like a tablet in here. You can not get a full laptop, but definitely the tablet or maybe a notebook size computer would fit. And it's got a lot of pockets. We've got pockets on the outside. We've got a made one there. When we open it up, we've got a zippered pocket plus some divided pockets here and lots of room to store your goodies. All right, so we're going to go over all the instructions on how to make these at home. You can get the pattern from us over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, and we actually have got two kit options for you today while supplies last. We've got the Rifle Paper Company version, and then we also have these blocked whales. And our pattern, our sample maker for this one, Vicky, did a fabulous job. We've got like next level pattern matching here. Our whales match on the top and across, and then also down that front pocket and on the sides. And she did that just with the regular like kit sample that I cut. I didn't give her extra fabric or anything. So this is a really fun one that you can have some fun with, really bring it to like the next level that you wouldn't get pattern matching like this if you bought it at the store, unless you paid big bucks. So you can really have some fun with that. All right, let's get into the tutorial and make these really fun bags. So the first thing you're going to want to do is cut out all your pieces and your fusible interfacing. And then you're going to want to fuse everything all at once, and then everything will be ready for your assembly. Now I'm going to show you how to fuse the front pocket because it's a little bit different than normal. Typically your interfacing is going to be the same size. In this case it's not. It's about half of the length or the height, because this is going to fold over and this will reduce the bulk and the thickness in that. So what we're going to do is this is going to end up being the front of our pocket, whatever the interfacing side is facing. So I want to pay attention and see if there's any directionality to my fabric, and really this one could go, I feel like, any way, but I'm going to choose this part here as the front of my pocket. So I'm going to lay that interfacing down, and I want the shiny side up. That's the side that has the glue on it. And then I'm going to lay my piece on top of that, and I'm making sure to match up those corners and my bottom really well. Now you want to iron this way with the interfacing sticky side up, facing the wrong side of your fabric, and then from your fabric side first for two reasons. One, if you accidentally get your interfacing flipped the wrong way, you fuse it to your mat and that's a lot easier to clean up than if you fuse it to your hot iron. And two, you get less wrinkles this way. Now, I do not use steam in my iron. I know the pattern recommends it. What I do instead is I will give it a spray with my spray mister, and that essentially gives you the same effect without having the risk of your iron spitting over time and getting gross, which has happened to every single iron that I've ever put water into. All right, so I'm gonna start at my bottom edge and just kind of do some lifting and pressing along that way. I'm going to work my way up, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this, but I want to at first just kind of get everything nice and down. And you really want to pay really close attention to those edges and your corners. That's what really matters. And of course, if you were doing any other one, then you would be doing the entire piece, but I just have to concentrate on the bottom half. And my Aliso right now, the one that lifts up on its own, is at home. I need to get a second one for our shop now that I'm filming here, because I like to have that for my personal sewing as well. But this one, you can tell it keeps coming off on me because there's a timer on it. The Aliso has a 30-minute timer that you can leave it down, which is one of the reasons why I love it for quilting, because see, it just shut off on me for the second time while fusing this, and so you gotta do the lift up to get it to re-engage, and that's annoying. So I love the Aliso. We don't sell it. We have an affiliate link for it that we can put in the video description, but I know that a lot of you guys are asking about that one in the videos, and it's great. I've had it for 5 years, I think, and it still works great. All right, we're gonna see if we're done after I've gotten that fused. That's doing pretty good. I'm also gonna iron from this side as well. So we're gonna skip ahead. What we should be doing in the directions is doing the handle next, but as long as I've got that front pocket out, we're gonna finish getting this ready to go, and then we'll come back to the handles. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna fold that in half with your wrong sides together and your interfacing up. Now, I don't really like to use pins when I'm working with these. What I do instead is I use clips. Whenever I'm working with a lot of interfacing or canvas fabric or cork or anything that is heavier than your regular quilting cotton, I prefer to always use these clips because I find that a lot easier to get everything to stay in place than when you're trying to pin through a lot of different layers. All right, so I've got my bottom edges clipped together, so that way that's going to stay in place, and I can cut my edges to create those corners on the pocket. All right, so you're going to refer to your pattern instructions. You're going to need to make a mark in from the top of the fold, so here's our fold side, and then also up from the bottom. So you're going to make those two measurements, and then you're going to connect them with a line, and now we're going to cut on the line, and that's going to create that angled pocket. And since we have clips, I'm actually going to flip it this way, that way I can get my ruler nice and flat. Now using a 1/4 inch stitch, we're going to sew along our angles here and then also along the bottom. We're going to leave the sides open because that's how we're going to turn it, because we already have our fold connected. That is all one piece. So angles and the bottom using a 1/4 inch stitch. I'm going to reinforce my stitches at the beginning and end of each stitch. That way it won't pop open when I am turning it. Now for this really long stretch, I'm going to sew with the interfacing down. That way the feed dogs won't accidentally stretch out my fabric. I'm working with canvas, so it's pretty unlikely that that's going to happen, but it definitely can happen with quilting cotton. So now we're going to turn this right side out. You can just sort of start working at it. It's a little too small of an opening for me to get my hands in, but if you get it turned that way, just over a little like you're turning the cuff of a sleeve, then you can start pushing the rest of it out too, a little by little. All right, once you have it to this point, what you really want to do is make sure that you're pushing those corners out. So you kind of just want to walk your fingers up that corner and really get it good and pointy the best you can. All right, so I've got it mostly in the shape that I wanted. I'm going to give it a really good press, and I'm going to use that spray mister so I can get it nice and crisp. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that this back lining part isn't rolled to the front. That's really easy for that to happen, but I want it to kind of be rolled and pressed over, so all I see is just that front piece and no hint of what is on the back. I'm going to start with the top because that's going to be the most obvious part on this bag, so I want to make sure that that looks really nice first. Get a real nice crisp seam here. All right, that's looking good. I gotta do some rolling back here to make sure that I'm not seeing any of the back part of that pocket. We're gonna do the same thing for the bottom. For the bottom, what I like to do is I kind of like to get it there and then take my fingernails and press that seam out. So I'm not getting, sometimes you'll have like a little pleat at the bottom where there's just a little bit of a gap and then things aren't quite the right size and it just doesn't work out as well as it could. All right, I'm gonna give it one more good spray, especially along those edges, and press it one more time. All right, so now I'm going to top stitch along the top edges only. This one will get top stitch, but it will be when we're attaching it to the bag front. So just go all the way around there. When you come to this corner, you're going to want to kind of stop like right in that corner so you can pivot and then have your top stitching always be the same length from your diagonal all the way down. So you just kind of want to slow down and take that area a little slow so that you don't have extra stitches in there and it doesn't look as neat as it could. All right, so we're going to set our front pocket to the side for now. We'll need that later. And we're going to go back to step 2 and we're going to prepare our handle. So I'm going to lay this out with the interfacing side up, and then we're just going to start pressing it in half first to get ourselves a really good crease. And we're going to do that all the way down the length of the handle. All right, now that I made it all the way down, pressing it in half, I'm going to take my raw edge and I'm going to fold it into that crease line that we pressed in, and I'm going to work my way down one side first, and then we'll go back and hit the other side. Now I'm going to do the other side, and I do things a little bit differently for the other side. What I'll do is I still fold it in half to meet the center, but then I also fold it over and make sure that my folded edges are even with each other. That way I know that I've got a nice straight bag handle when I'm ready to go. Now that I have everything pressed, I'm going to top stitch down both sides, and I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch top stitch. It is totally up to you what width you want your top stitching to be, and that is really just personal preference and what you think looks good. I like to have a little bit more length in mine, but I definitely have seen ones where they're super skinny, and that looks really fabulous too. What's more important is that you're consistent and that your stitch is nice and straight as you work. So I always start with the folded side first, or the double fold side. That way I can get that nice and down and together, and then I can kind of just whip through the single fold side. I also should have told you guys, go ahead and go up to 3.0 whenever you're top stitching. It looks a lot neater. So next we're going to create the shape of the bag. Now, just like when we were working with our front pocket, when we had to measure in from the top and the bottom, there's going to be some measurements on your pattern that you're going to want to mark on your sides and your top to create the diagonal line. And then also we're going to cut out some corners to create the gusset at the bottom of the bag, so that way it's wide, you can fit stuff in it. So I'm not giving you the measurements, nor am I going to mark that on camera, because you've got to get the pattern, support the designer to do that, and you can get it. It's the Trendsetter, and you can get it on our website at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. I'm going to go ahead and trim off the parts that I marked off. Once you've cut all of your lining for your main bag pieces and your outside pieces, you're going to take your pocket that we prepared earlier and you're going to place it a specific measurement from the top down. And you want your inner facing side to be out. That's going to be your stiffer side. And then what I like to do at this point is I like to clip those edges. And again, I do that because we're dealing with a lot of really thick stuff here. I'm working with canvas. I've got some decor bond in there, which stiffens everything up. So even if you have quilting cotton, I definitely prefer the clips to anything else, because it just, you know, it doesn't bend your pins all up and it still holds it in place really nicely. All right, so now I've got to top stitch. The pattern recommends 1/8 of an inch from the bottom. I did a 1/4 inch top stitch for everything else, so I think I'm going to do a 1/4 inch just so that it looks consistent throughout the bag. I'm not going to lose, you know, that much in terms of storage in there, so I think I'm going to do that a little differently, but that's where you can sort of take your own liberties and have some fun with it and make it your own. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce that just to start, because we are holding it together with this stitch. And I'm just being really careful to keep the bottom edge of the pocket in line with the right edge of my presser foot. That will help it look more professional because I'll have a really nice straight seam. So I'm skipping around a little bit in the pattern instructions because I think it makes sense to add the handle right now and just have our entire side of the bag complete before we start working on the inside. So I'm not giving you the measurements for where you're supposed to place your handle. That information is in the pattern, but there is a really great tip for how to get these nice and even and lined up and centered. So do make sure you pay attention to that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to top stitch 3 times, going up the edges until I'm even with my top stitching line on my pocket, and then coming down and then repeating that process. So I've stitched over it 3 times to get that handle good and secure. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And again, I'm using clips. I have 1 on the bottom and then I have 2 on the top. I like to put 1 on each side of the handle. That way it doesn't shift over as I'm working, because I've got 1 on each side to make sure it stays nice and straight and my bag turns out really fun and fabulous and professional looking in the end. So when you're top stitching, you want to do your best to stay on the line that you've already stitched on those handles. That'll make it look more professional if you can stay right on top of that instead of having several clear lines where you're going all over the place. All right, so I'm stitching up until I'm even with my top stitching line from when I was going over that pocket. And then once I'm pretty sure I'm in line, I'm going to turn it, and I'm right in line. If I stitch straight forward, I'll be good to go. If not, you can make a little bit of an adjustment until you are happy with where you're at. And then I'm going to stitch over to my next stitching line and then just keep going around like that. You can see I'm making a teeny little adjustment here because that stitch was a little wider than my stitching was. So I just lifted it up, scooched it over just a teeny bit, so that way I can go down on the exact same stitching line that's already there. All right, so we're going around a second time. And I'm making my third pass. Obviously I could sew a lot faster than this, but I'm going quite slow because I want to make sure I'm right on top of those lines every single pass I make. All right, now I'm going to do everything again on the other side. All right, so I've got my top stitching complete, and you can see that we have created some divided pockets on the outside by doing that. These edges are still free here, but they'll get caught in when we sew our bag outsides together. So now I've got my bag outside completely done. I've also sewn a handle to the back side of the bag, and we're ready to get working on the inside. So we're gonna continue doing things just a tad bit out of order from the pattern, because I think it makes sense to do one entire side of the inside and then the next entire side. The pattern has you preparing pocket pieces at different points, so we're just going to do it all at once, working on one side at a time. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my divided pocket ready. So I've got one lining piece with everything fused and my angles cut on the top and my quarters out from the bottom. And then I've got my divided pocket. So I'm going to take and I'm going to fold that hot dog style, and I'm just going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam going down the edges. You can pin this if you want. As long as you're confident in the way that you have put it together, you probably can skip that step. Now I've been top stitching, so my seam is at a 3.0. I need to move that back down to the 2.0 that I typically use for piecing and quilting, so that I get a nice good seam there. And I'm going to reinforce these stitches because we will be turning it right side out and I don't want it to come apart. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press the seam open, and I don't want to press the outside, so I'm just going to use the very tip of my iron to do that, and that way I'll be able to maneuver it where I want once I get it turned right side out. All right, now I'm just going to turn this right side out, and we're going to get it pressed and ready to go in our pocket. All right, so I've got my seam just right towards the bottom. That's going to be on the inside. We're not going to see it. And I'm just kind of making sure that it's nice and smooth and straight. And I've got about the same amount on either side from the seam to where that fold is. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a press initially just to get it nice and flat. And then I'm going to hit it with that spray mister as well. Now we need to do a little bit of top stitching on here as well. Now here is where my seam is, so that's going to be our bottom. So I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to top stitch along my top here. That way when you're digging in to put your keys or whatever you need in there, your hand sanitizer, it's going to work out just fine. And it won't keep unfolding and getting all messy in there. Now for this top stitching, I'm going to leave my stitching at 2.0. There's no interfacing in this, so I don't think there's any reason to go bigger with this top stitch. So the pattern will tell you where to place the pocket from the top. So you're just going to lay that on top in place. And then I'm clipping that in place again with my clips instead of pins. And you want to make sure that obviously your top stitching is on top and that your seam is going to be way at the bottom, so that way you're not going to really ever see that again, unless you're really digging for something. So now what we need to do is we need to make these pockets the same size. So I'm going to flip that over, and now I can see pretty clearly, and I think you guys can too. You can see where that edge is. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim that off with my rotary cutter. All right, I'm just lining up with the edge of that interfacing and giving it a little trim. We'll do that on both sides. I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple of clips at the top of that angle for the pocket, just to keep everything in place as we're working. All right, so now we're gonna stitch all the way down. We're gonna start a little bit before where our pocket starts, stitch all the way around, along the bottom, and then back up the side, and that will get this secured to our lining piece. Now, this stitch we want to be within the lining when we're on the outside, so I'm moving that needle as far over as I can get it, so that way I'm not going to see these side stitches when I go to sew my bag together. All right, I'm going to keep my 1/4 inch here, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my needle so that way I am where I want to be here, and then I'm going to move my stitch back to my 1/4 inch seam. And now when I continue on sewing, I'm going to be able to sew my 1/4 inch stitch because I've got my presser foot lined up with the bottom of my pocket, and I've moved my needle back to that 1/4 inch seam. All right, now I'm going to give everything a turn. I'm going to change my stitch back to that tiny stitch, and I'm moving it so that my edge is now even with the edge again. The edge of the press foot is even with the edge of the fabric. Now I'm going to stitch with that tiny stitch again the rest of the way around that pocket. So my friction gel pens disappeared somewhere between filming the last video and this one. So what I've done here is I've measured from the center and then out just a smidge, and I marked this with some yellow chalk, which I happen to just have hanging around. You want to use something that's removable because this is going to be sewed over and then you want it to go away. So friction gel pens are great for that. I would not use a pencil, and definitely not a pen, an ink pen. So I'm going to start stitching just a little bit above where my pocket is. I'm going to stitch all the way down, and I'm going to reinforce the stitches in between. And what you'll do is you'll have 2 large pockets here for keys or whatever you need to put them in, and then you've got one where you can put some pens. Great to have with you since you don't want to touch other stuff right now that wasn't yours. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that, and then we are going to be ready to get on to our zippered pocket. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move my sewing machine needle so that it is right in the middle. I find it's easier when you're trying to stitch on top of a line to have it right in the middle than set up to sew a 1/4 inch seam. I don't know, it's just easier for me to do it that way to kind of keep it down the center. All right, so I've got my needle down just before where that pocket starts. I'm going to take a couple stitches forward, a couple stitches back, just to get that really nice and reinforced so that it doesn't rip open with use. And we're going to do the same thing at the bottom. All right, now I'm going to repeat that on the other side. All right, so you can see we've got 2 nice pockets on the outside, one tiny little one for pens or whatever it is you need to bring with. Maybe some readers might fit in there. And we are now ready to move on to our second interior lining, and then we're ready to get this bag together. All right, now it's time to create our zippered pocket. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to refer to your pattern instructions, because they tell you the measurements of where you're going to mark out this zippered lining. So essentially you're going to create this rectangle that has a line down the center that we're going to cut out eventually, and 2 little V's on the end, and that will also be some cut lines. Now I've got my zippered pocket piece, and I'm going to fold that in half lengthwise, and no need to press this with your iron. Just go over it with your finger so that way you can match it up with the center that you've marked also on your piece. And I'm going to line that up so that I've got a good chunk going over. So I'm doing it right sides together here. So I can feel my fabric piece is ending right about here. You just want to have a good chunk going above as well. And then I've got it nice and lined up. And the big thing is you want to feel, like I can feel that I've got about a good inch on either side here. That's going to give me plenty of room to be able to sew up those seams when I'm all done. So what I like to do at this point is, again, do some clips so that way we are good to go and everything will remain where it should be. So I'm just clipping my interfacing to my pocket, at the top, and I can't really do it on the bottom. It comes in a little bit too far, so I'm just gonna have to be really careful when I'm sewing. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stitch all the way around the outside of the rectangle that we drew. I'm gonna start on the inside of one of the long sides though, because I don't wanna stop at the end, because that's gonna be a stress point. We want it to be at a nice spot where, you know, it's not gonna constantly getting tugged on for a zipper. All right, so I've got everything laid out. I'm making sure that everything is nice and flat underneath so I don't sew in any pleats at this point. That would not be good. And I'm starting about, I don't know, an inch or two in on that zipper, and I'm going to just go ahead and stitch all the way around. All right, I've got everything turned, so I'm checking again to make sure that everything is nice and flat, and it is. So I'm good to sew down the other side of my rectangle. All right, I'm rounding out to where I started. So I'm gonna stitch about an inch or so past where I started. Then I'm gonna reinforce those stitches, making sure to stay on that line. Now I've got everything laid flat here, and I'm making sure that I'm not gonna accidentally clip through this part on the end underneath, because we don't want to go through the pocket and then have to redo all this. So I'm just gonna take it and fold it in half, and I'm just gonna give the teeniest little clips because I want it to be nice and straight. So that's gonna allow me now to get my scissors through. So I'm laying it out nice and flat again to make sure again that I'm not getting any of that pocket. All right, so now I'm just taking my really sharp embroidery scissors, and I'm just gonna clip straight down that line. You could also use a rotary cutter if you wanted, but you are still gonna have to get ones like this. I've clipped right up to that point. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clip out to that corner, but not beyond. You do not wanna cut through that stitching line. Otherwise you're gonna be doing this again, because that's gonna unravel over time. And just as you're doing this, I can't stress it enough, make sure you are only cutting through the 2 layers of lining and pocket. Otherwise you're gonna be cutting into something that you need to have the pocket all together. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this pocket and we're going to put it through the opening and bring it through. Now I'm going to flip it over to the right side, and what I'm working to do here is first, just with my fingers, get it so that I've got a really nice sharp fold on those lines. I'm just going to finger press that a little bit. Now I'm going to give this a good spritz with my spray mister, and I'm first going to work on this bottom edge and get it real nice and pressed flat. Then I'm going to move to my top, and lastly my sides. And what I'm trying to do here is make sure I'm not seeing any of that pocket lining from the front side of the lining. I want that all to be tucked behind so that it just looks really nice and neat when it's all said and done. If you've been making bags for a while and you're struggling with how to make them look more professional, like you bought them in a store, and then you can be like, oh, I bought it myself, or I made it myself when someone asked where you got it, and really impress people. It's these little details that make a big, big difference. All right, so I've got that pretty well situated on that side. We're going to do this side just a little bit more. Give that a good press. All right, so you can use Steam a Seam and just put a little bit on either side of that zipper tape and just fuse that in place. What I like to do is just kind of fuss with it as I'm going, but I'm kind of laying it out on here so you can see more clearly than you'll be able to when I'm sewing. What you want to do is just evenly get this zipper tape going straight down the center, and then again I'm going to start in a little bit, stitch all the way around, and then go past where I started about an inch or so and reinforce those seams, and then we'll be ready to go. I always like to put my zippers on the left side as I'm right-handed, so I like to grab it and then pull to the right. And I do keep my zipper fully closed for the entire stitching, because we're just going to be able to go straight over those zipper teeth when we're sewing. All right, just like before, I've just made sure that everything is really flat so that I'm not accidentally stitching where I don't want to stitch. And I'm just going to go ahead and start going around that zipper. All right, when you're going over the zipper teeth, you want to go nice and slow. You absolutely can sew right over zipper teeth without breaking your needle, but you don't want to go at top speed when you do it. All right, I feel like I've done a pretty good job at keeping everything center. So at this point, I really just have to make sure that I'm maintaining that as I go through that second side. Now this always happens to me. You can see that my zipper pull has gone underneath, which we don't want to have happen. We don't want to stitch that in or we won't be able to use our zipper pocket. So right about now I like to just get it back where it needs to go and continue on stitching. All right, I'm just about back to the beginning, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch about 1 inch or so beyond. And then again, reinforce those stitches, making sure to stay on the same stitching line. All right, so before you do anything else, go ahead and test your zipper. Make sure that it opens all the way. It should open just fine if you follow the instructions, but if it doesn't, that means you stitched over the zipper teeth somewhere and you're gonna have to fix it before you can move on. I'm gonna go ahead and move to the back and I'm just gonna trim down my zipper. And I want it to get trimmed down because I'm gonna be stitching a 1/4 inch seam to close up this pocket, so I want it to be shorter than that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I've got my clips on the bottom. I'm going to sew this seam first and then I can get my edges lined up and sew those second. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce these stitches at the beginning and end of the seam. You can see I've got the main lining part of the bag over here because I do not want to accidentally stitch that. All right, now that we've got that together, you can kind of press down and you can kind of start from this upper part here and then just stitch down until you get where you want to be. And I think I am going to give this a little bit of a press here. And instead of pressing open, I'm just going to press that. It's kind of down as far as it can be, and then there's just a teeny little bit below that. It wasn't quite in half when I got it ready, but by giving that the press down here, it's going to be a little bit easier to keep my edges nice and straight as I am sewing. Also going to give it a little clip just to make sure that my bottom stays at my bottom. Now when you're stitching this, you're going to want to make sure that you're picking this up and folding it over. That way you're just stitching down the edge and the rest of your lining is free and clear. Go ahead and reinforce those stitches so your pocket doesn't come apart with use. All right, now we've got our second lining piece. We've got our zippered pocket ready to go. It's looking good. And we are ready to assemble this bag and get it all together. Home stretch, guys. All right, so I've got my outside, and I've already liked to tell you I like to pull my zipper from my left to my right. So I'm going to just go ahead and pull that down, and then I'm gonna line my zipper with the pull side on the left, just like that. I'm actually gonna grab this and I'm gonna clip it out of the way so that it stays out of the way while I'm assembling this. And then I'm going to clip the zipper in place along the top of my handle, or the top of my bag on the outside front. Now the pattern doesn't specify which one should go next, but I'm going to do my zippered pocket. That way my zippers are both going to be on the same side if I leave these guys right sides together here. So now what I'm going to do, since I've gone through that preliminary just getting everything in place, I'm going to go ahead and clip a little bit closer here, and I'm going to do them about every inch or so, just to really make sure this is really well secured and I've got all 3 layers going and that my edges are all at the same point on the outside so that I have a really nice looking zipper when everything is said and done. All right, so now I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam all the way down here, and then we're going to be ready to do the same thing on the other side. Actually, I've decided I'm going to go ahead and get a little fancy here. I pulled out my zipper foot. If you don't have one, it looks like this, and the little groove will sit right inside of that zipper. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on so I can stitch right up to where that zipper is. And I'm going to want to move my sewing machine needle off of a 1/4 inch and back to the center in order to use this foot. And since I have my zipper teeth pulled all the way up here, I want to be able to get as close to that zipper as I can. So I'm actually going to unzip this entire thing. And I have a double zipper here. You guys are going to have singles for the kit that goes with this. This is just what we had on hand before we got our order in. So I pulled that all the way down. That way I can get right up to that zipper teeth all the way down. So what I'm doing is I'm setting this down, and that little groove there sits right on top of where those zipper teeth are. So that way you can get really, really snug in and get a really nice professional looking finish. And just take it slow. You know, we've spent a lot of time getting to this step. There is no need to rush it at this point because you can see the finish line. All right, I've got to the end. I'm going to reinforce those stitches a bit. All right, once you finish stitching, the first thing you want to do is test your zipper. Make sure you can still unzip and zip it and that you didn't go over anything with thread. And I'm good here. So now I can repeat and do the same thing on the other side. All right, so first I'm going to take and I'm going to clip this out of the way again. That was very helpful in keeping everything nice and straight and easy to sew. All right, so now I'm going to get right sides together so that the right side of my outer fabric is facing the zipper teeth and also the other right side. You also want to work to make sure that you are lined up at the right points here. Like everything should be nice and centered with your bag bottom below. All right, now I've got that ready to go. I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to put my other line piece also right sides together with the lining piece from below, and then do the clipping where I'm clipping about every inch or so to get that ready to sew. All right, I'm all clipped, so I'm going to stitch down the other side. All right, we've got our moment of truth. I'm going to make sure the zipper still works, and it does. It goes all the way down, so we are good to go there. Now at this point, if you've done everything correctly, you should have 2 outsides on the top and 2 insides on the bottom, and they should be ending up at about the same points on the zipper, so that way when we sew everything together, we will be good to go, which we're about to do right now. I'm going to unclip these because at this point we want to get our edges together, so we're going to have to deal with our handles being on the inside. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get these guys together, smush down those handles a little bit. This is the point of every bag where it just gets to be a tad bit unruly. So there's a few things I want to make sure I'm doing. One, I want my handles to match up on the bottom, so I'm going to make sure that I've got those right on top of each other, and I'm putting some clips there. This is exactly the reason why I use clips, because at this point it would be almost impossible to pin through all those layers of canvas and interfacing, but I can do it pretty well with clips. So I'm going to go ahead and do my bottoms, and we're going to stitch all the way across the outside of the bag, and we'll leave a little bit of opening on the inside for turning. All right, so we're not going to do anything with these corners just yet, but we will be sewing our outsides together, and I like to have it so that way my zipper is turning down to the lining. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up with that zipper folding down. So all my seams are headed that direction. I'm going to put a clip there to keep that in place. Then I'm just going to work my way down, clipping all these edges every couple of inches or so. And any point where it really matters, like where these edges are and the turn of that angle happens, and corners like these. Now when I'm working with this bottom seam, what I really just do is I want to give myself a good stopping point. So I'm going to get my corners together, and then I'm really only going to sew maybe about an inch or so, because I want to give myself a really big area to turn, because this is really thick fabric and it's going to be a little bit unruly as you do it. And so you don't want to be ripping those stitches open because you didn't give yourself enough room. All right, so I'm leaving my zipper long for now. I'm going to trim that when I'm all done, but I do have my zipper pull on the inside here. You don't want it to be out way on the tail of the zipper, or you're never going to be able to zip your bag again because you will have stitched it on the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch all the way around the edge, and then all the way around the top outside bottom, and then the other edge, and then I'm just going to do about 1.5 to 2 inches on the bottom lining, because we're going to turn there. And you want to go around this 2-3 times, because this is a very like this is it. This is a seam that has to stay together or your bag will fall apart. So doing it a couple of times around is just, you know, you've taken so much time to get to this point. Make sure it stays together and take that extra time to go around a couple times. Make sure to reinforce those seams as well whenever I get started with the seam and end. I'm going to slow down a little bit as I come to the zipper. Again, you can sew straight over top of the zipper, no problems. You just don't want to do it at full speed. I'm coming up to the point where those handles are. I'm going to go real slow here because I'm about to go through a whole lot of layers, and I don't want to break a needle. All right, so I'm at my bottom here. I'm going to start and reinforce that seam, and then I'm really just going to sew just the teeniest little bit, maybe about 1 inch or 2, and then reinforce that seam really good. I'm going to go over that several times because I really do not want to rip those seams out, because I've done it a million times when I've turned my bag out. I'm going to repeat that over here, and again, just reinforce a ton of times, probably 3 or 4 times. All right, I've stitched all the way around one time. I'm going to go around one more time, and then we're going to do our corners and clip our zipper. All right, we are ready to get our corners together, and then we can turn this bag and call it done. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clip the ends of my zipper off. We don't need those. Now, working one corner at a time, I'm going to try and get all of the seams going in the same direction. That'll make more sense as we go here. All right, so what I want is to make sure that my corners are going in opposite directions here. So what I'm doing is I'm pressing my bottom seam to the right and my side seam to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and get those nested together and then give it a clip. So now when I come to this side, I also want to press my bottom seam to the right and my side seam to the left. That way, both of my side seams are going to be going in the same direction, and both my bottom seams will be going in the same direction, and it will come together and lay a lot flatter when it's all said and done. So that means since this one is going to the left for the seam here, it also needs to go to the left for my outer seam as well. So I'm getting that going to the left and my bottom going to the right. Pin that, clip it. This is a really thick seam here. We're gonna do the same thing over here. Get it going in the same direction, and then everything will be facing the same direction as you go. Now, especially for this seam, this is really thick. There's a lot going on here. I'm going to go ahead and clip my outsides as well, just to help keep that boxy bit going as I'm working on it, because those bag handles, there's just a lot in here and I need all the help I can get. So I'm just going to make sure I've got everything as clipped up as I can be before I start sewing. Might as well do the lining for good measure as well. All right, so you can see how this makes a nice straight seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch across that. And again, you want to do this 2-3 times, going across it, and with that 1/4 inch seam, because this is going to have some stress on the bag, especially on the exterior. You don't want it to come apart with use. So 2-3 times across, and then we're ready to turn this and call it done. All right, so I'm reinforcing those stitches at the beginning. Pull those clips as I come to them and reinforce at the end as well. Then I'm going to do that one more time before I call it done. And just repeat everything. So that last section is only slightly more awkward than this section. What we're going to do is we're going to reach our hand in the opening for the lining. And I should have left that zipper open. I can pull it open with my fingers, so make sure you guys leave the zipper open. I'm going to grab the end here and I'm going to start working my way forward here to pull it through. My handles, they're coming. So grabbing some corners. All right, so I've got it right side out now with this part. So before I start messing anything with the lining, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shape the outside of the bag. So I've got my hand on the inside and I'm poking out my corners on both sides here. And then also running my hand up that side seam of the bag to help shape where those edges are. Then once I'm pretty happy with that, I'm going to start shoving this lining back inside. Then we got the same issue here. I've got it all in there, but it's kind of a hot mess. So I want to make sure that my corners are all poked out there. Just of course, the right side is going to be facing you for this one. All right, so one final thing you'll need to do is you'll need to stitch your little opening shut. I like to do a little whip stitch with that. It actually might be a little easier to do before you shove everything back in. But this is it. This is the finished bag. I'm really loving it. It is super, super cute. I've got the double zipper here so we can put it in the center. But it is so, so fun, and it's a really good size. I mean, you can fit a good amount of stuff in here. You couldn't do a laptop, but you definitely could do a tablet. You've got your outside pocket, so you got some room for your keys, your extra face mask, your hand sanitizer. And then you open it up, and we've got our interior zipper pocket, so that one is really nice. And then you've got your divided pockets on your lining as well, where you can put a few extra goodies. And then this is, I mean, that's a decent sized bag. We can fit quite a bit of things in here. I could fit wipes and diapers and everything I need for my wallet in there, so that is always a good thing. So go ahead and zip that up. I really like how this turned out. I think this is really like a fun floral. It's a modern floral. It's Rifle Paper Company. She's just does fabulous work with her designs, and I think that it's really pretty. So the lining is actually art gallery, but it matched really well to those florals, so I think that that looked really, really nice. We'll just take a quick look at the other one that we did as well here. This one was made by our staff member Vicky. She did like top-notch job with pattern matching here. We've got these block print whales from Cotton and Steel on unbleached, so the teal is really trendy right now, and then I just really love the look of it on that. But we just have to do a little close look at this. We have got whales lined up for the pocket and also over the top. They match up, and as well on the side. She really took a lot of time pattern matching, and she was able to do it with the regular cut that I just gave her. I was not thinking that she would get them all lined up. I asked her to just make sure they were straight so that we didn't have crooked whales, but man, does she do a good job there. And then we've got our little teal turquoise zipper, and then we have some Tula Pink Glacier for the inside. Nice little light lining so you can see everything in there, and that just looks fantastic. She did a great job with that. Looks fabulous. We have kits for both of these while supplies last over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. my guess is this one will go first. Usually whenever we have rifle, that one is gone before everything else. But go check it out. The pattern is called the Trendsetter, and it's a zip top bag, and it is really fun, really cute to do, and sews up pretty quickly. I mean, I was able to do this one in an afternoon. That was having prepped everything before. So, you know, everything was cut and fused and ready to go. The actual sewing part was able to be done in an afternoon. So really, really cute. And also, we'll do a little bit of a close-up maybe with the pictures here, but you can see how the top stitching kind of changes it, the look of the bag a little bit too. So here, I really tried as best I could to match the threads with what was going on, and your kit is gonna have your threads. And here I did 1/4 inch top stitching for everything. And here, when Vicki made her, she did just right on the edge. And you can really see the difference. Here it becomes a decorative element, and here it just kind of blends and adds just a teeny little bit of texture. So depending on your choices you make as you make it, you can really personalize and really have some fun with this and really make it your own. Well, thank you so much for following along with today's tutorial. Make sure you go grab the pattern, Trendsetter Zip Top, and that is from So Many Creations. You can get it on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We have kits for these 2 versions of it while supplies last. There's nothing in these. They are not stuffed or anything. They are just retaining their shape because of 2 things. One, we used that Decor Bond interfacing, and we are also using canvas for the outside bag. So it really holds its shape really well. That's what I really hated about bags and why I didn't personally do them until we started finding Jessica's pattern. Because whenever I would make like a quilted bag, it would be this floppy thing and it wouldn't really hold its shape and look very good. But when you use the proper outside fabrics and when you use the proper interior interfacing, you really can get something very nice that looks like you picked it up at a store, but it's custom to you and just beautiful. So check that out, have some fun with your stash, or you can get the kits that go with these. Thanks so much. And by the way, we have a ton of videos on bags, so we'll link to the playlist in the and in the video description down below. But I think this is like our 6th bag pattern that we've done of Jessica's and the tutorial to go with it. So we've got lots of ones to choose from. We got big bags, small bags, bags with a million pockets, bags that are super easy to do that you can do in 4 hours. So make sure you check that out. And until next time, happy quilting and bag making.